Hi, and welcome to Lights of the Round Table. My name's Susanna, and I've been anticipating this interview with Brooks Agnew for some time. We're going to be talking about the moon, so buckle up because we're going to take a trip to the moon. Apparently, he knows quite a bit about what's going on. We'll see what it has to do with what has happened in the recent month with the Russians. I guess it crashed one or Lunar 25 after I think 30, 40 years of the Russians not sending anything out to the moon. They were expecting or hoping for things to work out, and it didn't. And then shortly after, a few days after, what do we hear in the news again? Gosh, the Indians actually landed a little probe or something like that, again, on the moon on the South Pole. So I brought Brooks Agnew, who is, by the way, he is a seven-time, help me out here, Brooks. You're a seven-time bestseller author with a great trilogy called
Birth.
That's right. And I really highly suggest it to everybody. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But I also brought my buddy, also an electronic engineer. He is also a physicist, and his name is Marcus Olson, and he's my go-to with questions concerning science. I'm not good at these things or math, so he's my go-to person. I brought him in to make the conversation probably a little bit deeper and better. He might have some salient questions for Brooks as we are going to explore a few things, and this is all new territory. So buckle up, everybody. We're taking a trip to the moon, to the space, and thanks, Brooks, for coming in. All right, so we've heard all about what happened in the last few days and few weeks. Success story for India, landing a probe near to the south pole of the moon, I believe. And why is it so important, this area of the moon? What's going on? Can you tell us, for us novice
Yeah,
people?
yeah. Let me give you just a little bit of background. In 1968, I was interviewed for a newspaper in California, and I was one of the, I don't know, remarkable math students of the day. And the newspaper came to interview me, and they asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. Here I am in the eighth grade, right? So I said, well, I want to be an asteroid miner. Of course, they didn't know what to make of that. We hadn't even gone to the moon yet. Uh, and I've been fascinated with the space industry ever since. I'm not really a pure researcher. I'm more of a builder. So I'm primarily a manufacturing engineer, which has made me a student of several styles of engineering: chemical, mechanical, electrical, in order to build stuff. But I've stayed close to the industry my entire life. And in 2021, wrote a book called Asteroid Mining: The Future of Energy. And I put in it basically where we are right now with the space program. Everybody, JPL, NASA, Japan. I put in 4 chapters on the Space Force so we can understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the investment is and what the return on the investment is. And as an industry, it really got exciting in 2006 when there was a mission called the L-Cross mission. Now, the L-Cross was a spectrometer. It was designed to analyze the atmosphere of the moon, the molecules that are kind of floating around outside the moon. And when space teams put these missions together, they do have single missions, but then they also have backup missions and if something goes wrong missions. And one of the if something goes wrong missions with the L-Cross was they would be able to separate the engine from the spectrometer if something went horribly wrong. Well, it did. It ran out of fuel before the mission was over. So the orbit was decaying and the whole thing was going to crash into the moon and be pretty much a failure. Well, they had a backup plan, and that is to separate the engine from the spectrometer, let the engine hit the moon first, making a big plume in, thousands of feet high. And then the spectrometer would fly through that plume, analyze it, send the analysis back to Earth, and then smash into the moon itself. We were also looking at the moon from Earth using powerful telescopes and spectrometers from here, visual spectrometers. And when the plume happened, we photographed it. The photographs came out pretty good. not enough wavelength, not enough light coming through it to actually see what was in it. But the spectrometer did. And what it discovered was a tremendous amount of water and a compound called helium 3. Helium 3 we have on Earth, but only around volcanoes. Normally we have helium 4, which is what we fill our party balloons with. The reason helium 3 is important is because it's light a neutron. And this makes it excellent if you can fuse it together. It spits off two energetic protons, not neutrons, but protons. That means it's not radioactive. And the protons can be used for electricity directly. So it not
Mm.
only puts off heat, but it puts off electricity. It would virtually replace any fuel we have in any nuclear reactor in our world.
Wow.
And in one crater, the one crater that they bombed with the engine part of the ship, there was enough helium 3 to power Earth for 10,000 years.
Wow.
So everybody started focusing on the south pole of the moon. That was 2006. Now here we are 17 years later. A lot of those space programs are ready. It took like 10 years to get everything ramped up, get the money, put the things together, put the staff together, build the stuff, and get a launch engine. And everybody started going for it. The Indians tried once last year, and their probe left Earth perfectly. It went into orbit around the moon perfectly, and then it splatted. It just to land on the moon softly, remotely, is difficult to do because the gravity of the moon is not uniform. It's been hit by lots of meteors over millions of years. And so the gravity around the moon is very lumpy. It's not like, where you can just program it to land on the moon with a timed rocket burst. It has to be feedback from the lunar surface as you're descending. Much more complicated to do. So the Russians tried it again about 3 months ago, 3.5 months ago, and their probe went out of control and splatted into the moon. We actually photographed that crash site. The Indians did as they were going around the moon. And the Indians finally did land a few days ago on the South Pole of the moon. Not exactly on the South Pole because they're still going through the lunar night. If they were right on the South Pole, they would have light all the time because the light would be incidental or oblique across the South Pole. They could put some solar panels up and get sunlight all the time. But right now, they don't have sunlight. So they're in the lunar night, which lasts about 12 to 14 days. It depends on exactly how far south they are. And the lunar night gets down to around 20 degrees Kelvin, which is very close to absolute zero. So
Mm.
everything gets pretty chilly and pretty slow. Uh, the interesting thing is that they did deploy their rover, and their rover is equipped with a seismometer, a very sensitive seismometer, much more sensitive than what the astronauts put on the moon during the Apollo program, several sets, by the way. And it picked up some vibrations and sent them back to India, which they're being analyzed. And they thought, well, the vibrations should be, seismic activity or some kind of volcanic activity underneath the moon. But it's not likely. We're not seeing thermal signatures like that with any of the infrared or X-ray uh, units that we have orbiting the moon right now. We just don't see a corresponding thermal signature like you would with, say, volcanic activity. We see a lot of empty volcanic vents, but no current volcanic activity. So they're speculating, and I use that word very liberally, that it might be machinery operating inside the moon. That's what they're actually picking up with their probe. Interesting that now it goes to sleep for 2 weeks, so we have to sit in suspense until it wakes back up again for 2 weeks. But so that's the exciting thing is everybody wants to get to Schrodinger's basin, specifically what's called Shackelford crater, which is the large crater that is filled with the frozen helium-3. Because if we can core that, launch those cores into orbit, pick them up with what's called the orbiting cassette, it will actually snatch these, load up the cores, and then it will fly back to Earth. and then we'll get to analyze that helium-3 and practice with it.
Okay. But also, wouldn't that be important for then start colonizing the moon? Because then you have resolved one of the issues, and is how can you, which is energy. So if you're able to produce energy with helium
Yes.
three,
Well,
wouldn't
yes,
that
if you
be already
there's
prompt?
lots of soil oxygen and soil water, which is for fuel and oxygen and everything like that, of course. But the problem is you can't live on the surface of the moon. We've tried 3D printing, we've tried inflatable habitats. Nothing works on the moon because of the solar radiation. When the sun gets angry and it launches a CME or a solar wind, we don't have any shielding against that.
Right.
That will go right through whatever we try to put on the moon, unless it's lead, and we can't lift lead into space. So the only place to habitate on the moon is in the moon. And so, and I mentioned this in my book, we've located several volcanic vents. One of them is so large you could put the city of Philadelphia inside the moon. And all that really needs to be done is, and we could do this remotely, is put equipment up there like a large airlock, say 100 yards long, and then 3D print the opening shut, and then just start pressurizing that inside with air. And what you would end up with is a habitat where you could bounce around on the inside of the moon with no spacesuit. All you would need is heat and oxygen, which you have right there on the moon in the soil. So we have everything we need. We just need time and people to make that happen. And a lunar
And
colony,
perhaps someone's already starting with the seismic signatures that you've picked up, or the Indians
that,
have. Maybe
that's what I'm saying.
that's
Yeah.
the thought.
And the side of the moon that we see, which is the dark side of the moon, actually, probably not much activity because we can see it from Earth. We have
Mhm.
very powerful telescopes that can see it. But the far side of the moon is out of our sight. We can only see with orbiters, and those kinds of transmissions can be controlled. The far side of the moon might be quite busy.
I know. That's what I hear. So, what's your theory, Brooks?
Well, my theory is I know scientists and I know private corporations because I've worked for the Fortune 100 now. Well, I just retired in June. So it was about 33 years. They have the money and they have the willpower to take a risk. And when we're talking about a return on investment that is so large that it would be more than the entire gross domestic product of the planet, it's irresistible. People have to do it. And I have helped so many small companies that build components. They build brackets and chambers and generators and panels and all kinds of different alloys. And they get bought out and they get merged. And I help them for a little while, and then they get bought up by another company, and SpaceX and Bezos, and these companies are acquiring all these small companies because they have special skills and patents. And the CubeSats, for instance, are being used now for Starlink, but CubeSats have been around for a long time, and the companies never got big enough to actually make anything happen. So the food chain just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it keeps getting acquired and acquired until finally you have thousands of satellites, and now you can do something serious with it.
Mm-hmm. Marcus, you wanted to chime in, jump in for a moment while I look on to, open up a little page over here that I want to discuss as well.
Sure, that'd be great. I've got more questions than I do anything else, the ability to answer them. And you've gone quite a ways, Brooks, with some of your postulations and stating what's going on and this, that, and the other thing. With the helium-3 that they've been talking about on the moon now for 10 years or so, lately, like you say, they've been talking about it a little bit more. What would be the mode that it would be used on the moon to generate the energy? It's not like you just put it together and it magically happens. There's a lot more science involved there.
Yeah.
And doing things on another world, another planet, the moon, is another step, and bringing the helium-3 back to the Earth first to analyze it, of course, is probably valuable. But how would we actually go about doing that
Well,
in a
for
remote
the better part of 40 years, we've been building a facility in France called ITER, ITER. And it is taken the tokamak, which is the original Russian technology of developing a plasma and then smashing the plasma to create fusion. And they've done it
Yes.
for a few billionths of a second, but it's very difficult to do. And what happens is this ITER has become a city, and it's only halfway finished. It's probably going to take another 40 billion to finish it. I honestly don't think it will ever be finished. The magnets are pretty much done, and the chambers are done, but everything that supports it isn't finished yet, and they're running out of money for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is Ukraine. So the issues are you can't have atmosphere in the chamber, so it has to be totally evacuated of every molecule before you start up your plasma. And the second is you can't let the plasma touch anything in the chamber because it will react with it and destroy it. So you have gravity and you have air, which are the things we're trying to fight on the Earth. But you have less gravity and no air on the moon. So it's much easier to accomplish. Now, the process is what we call helium fusion. We've never actually done it because the activation energy is very, very high. We have done it with deuterium. We have done it with tritium. Both of those are radioactive. They have extra neutrons. And there you're right back to the same old shielding problem. So what needs to happen is this needs to occur in space. We need to make a vacuum bottle in space. We need to make a plasma in space in a small chamber, maybe the size of this Perrier bottle, and smash that helium-3 together and get the helium fusion to start. Once it starts, it's its own activation energy. You just feed it helium-3 and it runs. It generates electricity and heat. And that's all the energy you need on the moon to sustain a colony. So that's the process.
Well, you make it sound really easy. and yet here on the planet, like you're saying, trying to get the initial energy pulse in to get an output, which is we put a pellet, a single pellet or whatever it happens to be at the loci, and it at that point gives off the energy. We've just gotten to the point where we can get more out than we put in laser wise. Forget about the rest of the energy it takes to drive the plant.
Sure.
We're just getting to that point. So the next step would be a big one. But if it's self-sustaining after ignition, that's a big point.
No doubt about it. I mean, you have three methods that we've tried, and only one has actually been successful, although uncontrollable. One is the omega lasers, like you're talking about, which can create uniform compression and a lot of heat. The other is the tokamak, which is a magnetic field using magnets to smash the plasma. And the third is to use gamma rays, which is essentially an atom bomb, which we've already done lots of times. We use the atom bomb to create the gamma rays, which creates the compression frequencies, which makes the fusion, which is the hydrogen bomb. We have not been able to control hydrogen and make a usable energy force out of it. And that's another issue altogether. I don't really like the third choice. I like the omega lasers, although they take a tremendous amount of power. Just ask the Japanese. And ITER seems to be the right way to go. And I think you could put electromagnets on a very small scale on a ship and create fusion rocketry. And when you get to that point, now you've shrunk the amount of time it takes to get from the moon to Mars from 7 months on the short side to about 70 days, which is quite doable.
So let me just change a little bit. There's two things I want to talk about. One is you were talking about how these startup companies that you've helped in the past have been bought out by others, right? And when I was doing a little research last week, I found it quite interesting that there is actually a moon treaty. And I'm going, I cannot believe this. a moon treaty. So now you're talking about some of how these startups have been bought up. And I'm going, of course, there's a governing contract. There's a governing a treatment agreement, excuse me. And I'm going like, how can
There is
this
an
be?
agreement, but the Space Force is the force behind the agreement. And it's just a baby right now. They're violating it in so many different ways. It isn't funny. The idea, of course, well, I should say the thesis is that we don't weaponize space and we don't weaponize the moon. But we've already violated that. And so have the Chinese.
And that's what I wanted to come because I was reading it. And like you say, it's supposed to be for, for humanity. It's a framework, international framework. Nobody owns the moon. And yet here we go. I'm going, I don't think that's what we're seeing in real life. So yes, it looks.
I helped work on one of the drafts for the Peace and Space Initiative. And there were things we wanted to do with it, but the temptation to control the Earth from the moon is just too high. And I don't understand control anyway, Suzanne. I don't understand. Why can't you just let people live? Why do you have to control everybody? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, hopefully we'll find out soon if we're moving into a decentralized environment financially, if we become sovereign. Therefore, we're moving from a selfish society to a selfless society. Hopefully, this would also include our expectations in the future to be able to do mining projects and explorations outside of Earth. And I'm hoping that it will be more collaborative than anything else, and not, something that like what we're seeing right now is not a regime dictated kind of body governing, but more a sovereign, if we could say. But it's so convoluted right now.
Yeah,
Again.
well, I mean,
discrete competition.
as a mathematician, I look at the economic system as a science, and I see it based on two things. One is cash and value, and the other is credit. And right now we have a credit-based system, which is all messed up because, as you said, it's so centralized. It's in the hands of, I don't know, 5, 6 people, 7 people. But a value system is actually decentralized. And right now they're trying to push this central bank digital currency for obvious reasons, because then they can tell us when and where and how we can spend our money. But it can't happen in the United States. It just can't happen because 20% of the adults inside the United States, and I use that word liberally, not just citizens, but other people, they don't have bank accounts. They live and work and exist on cash. When they get paid, they go to these check cashing facilities and they pay the fee and they cash their check. And when they do, they disappear from the system. Nobody knows what green beans they buy. Nobody can track their movements. Nobody can tell them what to do or where. That's why they say cash is the currency of crime, because they can't see what they're doing. But it's not just 3 or 4%, it's 20% of our country. If they go to a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, the 20% lose the ability to live. And they're not going to accept that. That's why they can't do it in this country. This country could go to all cash. We could drop credit by forgiving all the debts and starting over again. We could do that, but it would be totally value based, because you and me and Marcus, we are the headwaters of all the money in this country, not the government. The government may print the money, but we're the ones that make the value.
Yeah. Well, my understanding is that the reason why you have the CBDCs is to actually implode everything else. It's a token, and I think that in order to get rid of the black market and child trafficking, human trafficking, and all these other things, you need to somehow be able to quantify. And I think the way that we're heading is to tokenize it in order to keep people honest and in order to claim our honesty and be able to live and let live. I don't know. That's how I see it. I know that there's a lot of great things coming up And I also think that where we're heading is, I don't know, I'm assuming that you are familiar with Nesara Gesara, which is bringing back our republic. It's bringing back sovereignty to each and every country. The banking reforms are going through in order to push society into a higher level. Consciousness is playing into all of this. I mean, there's a lot of so many components. And Marcus, I might lose you completely on this one, but and I'll send you the book. But one of the reasons why I'm also excited and how all of this is interconnected has to do with your book, your 7-time bestseller book. You've been there for several years now. You also have a great radio show for 14 years. Great syndicate, #1 in science and all that stuff. Last week you were talking about bureaucracy and the meaning of your bureaucracy, actually. So I'm going like, all right, that's so scientific, right? Anyways, it was a great talk, but your understanding comprehension is so much. And let me just say something about your tagline. I found it so funny. Where's your tagline? Where is my little piece of paper over here with your tagline? Because I just laughed at it. And my question to you, oh gosh, where are you? Here we are. Your tagline is delivering the present from the future. So Brooks, are you from the future?
I refuse to answer on the grounds that may incriminate me. The idea is that we are the only creatures on this planet, I believe, that can perceive time. We can perceive the past and we can envision the future. If we don't envision the future, we're lost. So when you take your imagination to the future with your clear idea, you gain experience from going to the future. It's kind of like a basketball player mentally practicing free throws. When the time comes time to do the free throw, he already has the mental practice. So I simply go to the future and learn things and then bring it back to the past, which is the present for me, and work on those things that are local around me that pertain to that future, things that vibrate with that frequency. And when I get to the future, lo and behold, there's the thing that I imagined, because I've been working on the frequencies that build that all along.
Well, very much so. That's what I'm feeling about the book. It's so, you wrote it some time ago, and yet it's so relevant to today's time.
I have 12 books in print. I'm working on my 13th, which is a sequel to Charm and Favor. But there are 7 Amazon bestsellers in there, and they recur. I mean, like they go to #1 and then they fall down to like number 500, and then they go back up again. Depends on if I'm on great programs like yours and then get exposure. But, I tell those stories and I relate them in a novel in such a way that people can read them, and they literally change by reading the books, because they learn about things like death and life and the purpose of life and all that stuff.
So going back to my question, I guess, and why your books are relevant and why we're talking about the moon. I expected that. When was it that we first went to the moon? Before 1960, before Kennedy. So 1962, 1963, 1967, we're talking Apollo time. Yet here we are, and the moon is still a mystery. And I expected technologies to have gone ahead, things to have happened by now in exploration. And one of the things that is so mind-boggling to me is there's 2 frontiers that we have not done yet: the brain and the moon, or the deep, or the ocean too.
Ocean floor, I was going to say. Yes.
Exactly, the ocean floor. And I'm going like, how can we have done so much between in the early 1900s? 1932, 1933, you have World War II, so many secrets there, and yet we are still, it feels so stagnant all this time.
Well, I mean, it isn't that we have done nothing. We have lots of things orbiting the moon. We have space programs that we launched, the Themis probe, for instance. It ran its mission, and then 2 of those satellites were repositioned to orbit the moon. So what we lack on the moon right now is precise navigation. So we are currently building GPS satellites for the moon, just like we have around Earth. In fact, when we go to the moon, we use the GPS satellites that are orbiting Earth to position on the moon.
Mhm.
Obviously, we don't get very close because we still have to land by hand. But if we had accurate GPS on the moon, all that stuff could be automated. We could launch all kinds of equipment to the moon for years and then put men on the moon and use that equipment to build a colony. But we can't do that because we don't have a GPS system. So, first things first. And of course, the GPS system isn't just the satellites around the moon, it also has to be tied to stations on the moon to overcome, well, I don't
The
want to get
wiggle.
into the physics of it, but our GPS system wasn't supposed to work because of the Lorentz equations. Tracking a moving object with a moving object that are moving in two different planes is supposed to be impossible. But we did figure out how to do it. Now we need to do that on the moon as well because there are no landmarks, there's no road signs on the moon. It's not like you can drive around the moon and find yourself or fly around the moon and find yourself. You have to find yourself relative to Earth. So, first, that it's called the Gateway Project. First, that, and then we build what's called the cislunar space. This is a space between the Earth and the moon. Refueling stations, repair stations, all that stuff can be manned. And then once that space is developed and we've got fusion rocketry, then we go further out, maybe to the asteroid belt beyond Mars and see if we can build a Mars colony. Although I think a Mars colony is 100 years away, I don't think it's very practical. The moon should keep us busy for a century.
It should. So, what about these alien technologies that I hear that we're supposed to, you know, talk about Hitler's times? Um,
What about the
are
alien
we?
technology we're supposed to have? I would love to have questioned Grush when he was there. I would have, because I would have asked three questions that nobody asks, nobody ever asks. I would say, if you contact non-biologic, let's say non-terrestrial beings with a ship, you have three questions. The first one is, where are you from? The second one is, what powers your ship? And the third one is, why did you come here? They never ask those questions. And then, of course, my fourth one would be is, where's the ship? Let's go see the ship right now.
Float. From what I hear, but it's true. What you bring into the table is true. Marcus, you want to add?
Yeah, and I just like to say, yeah, the whole alien technology thing comes to the forefront, perhaps also because we develop a lot of things that we never hear about ourselves. A lot of the black projects and whatnot, and trying to separate what is that and what's disinformation. I mean, it's entirely true that our government says, oh, that's not us. Well, who is it? Well, they kind of lead us to believe it might be an alien type thing. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't aliens, because it might not be the proof that there isn't, but it isn't the proof that there is either. And so, what I'm tired of is trying to guess. And I'm with you, Brooke. I think that there is a lot to do to develop what we have going on. However, I also know that we could have gone a lot further than supposedly we have since I was a kid. I grew up through all this, the whole space thing when,
Mm-hmm.
the moon landed and I saw it all happening. And, I spent my college time and postgrad time and everything watching and learning and working in the industry and just asking myself, where's it all going? Why haven't we gone? Why don't we know more? And the answer is we do know more. We just don't know what that more is. And I'm tired of it being hidden.
Yeah, well, we
It's
don't understand why governments keep all that stuff to themselves.
exactly. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier. Exactly, Brooks.
I mean, I could do a lot of things with anti-gravity drive. I know you could do. I mean, we did great things in the automotive industry, and I have patents in several industries, including chemical, and we made improvements. But quantum jumps, big jumps,
Yes.
like from vacuum tubes to transistors from Bell Labs. That happened like overnight. And the guy that filed the patent wasn't even working on that and didn't even have access to the ability to coat boron onto silicon. So how did he patent it? Where did that quantum leap in technology come from? And why keep it secret? Why not share it with humans? We are not afraid of not being alone in the universe.
That's
And,
correct.
and yet
I'm not
that's
afraid of it at all. We're here. We've been here. We will likely be here. And advanced civilizations likely got the ability to wipe us out in a heartbeat. And if they haven't,
Well, that's a great
they
question because
probably
I mean
won't.
it's obvious that UFOs are there, and it's
Yes.
obvious that they are as present as they want to be. And if they
Yes.
wanted to be more present, I don't think there's a damn thing we could do about it. So,
Well, no, I was walking past an anthill just this morning and I didn't stop to say hi.
very good point. Very good point. But I mean, they could be that far advanced of us and not really
Yeah.
care. They're just kind of observing us.
I
But
don't believe that though.
it brings you to a binary question. Are they only working with our governments or are our governments working with them? I mean, there's a series of realizations that go on with the answers to both those questions. Because if they're only working with our governments, then they're basically controlling this planet. We're being controlled by off-worlders, very advanced races that are using our governments to control us. If our governments are working with them, then what are they trading to them in exchange for their technology?
That's what I'm afraid of. Right there.
yeah. And isn't well, what is it? Well, what happened to Eisenhower? I mean, didn't he do a pact and didn't was it Eisenhower who did the pact with supposedly? Or was it somebody,
No,
another
I believe
president?
it was. I believe there was a handshake, and I've seen so many CGI stuff now. I don't even believe what I see in photographs anymore. Unless I see it and feel it with my own eyes now, I don't believe it.
All right,
I,
Brooks.
I call it a fact. It is a direct observation, but I'm a scientist and I work on corroboration.
All right. So let's put this to bed to rest. Did man actually hit the moon? Was Apollo ever there? Because
Oh,
there's
yeah,
so many
absolutely.
naysayers.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Indians photographed it as they were orbiting the moon and getting ready to land. They saw two of the landing sites.
Okay. So that should put every naysayer to bed, hopefully to rest on that
Well, it adds
idea.
another data point from a third party or from another party.
Mm-hmm.
Could all these parties, the Indians and our government and whomever, all be working together in a vast conspiracy to keep us all under control? Could. Probably not.
Yeah, I know, and that's what I want. That's why I want science to be science, because if we go back to your show the other day, bureaucracy, boy, do they ever try to just waste time, and we'll never know. So I think that I think one of the greatest things that we have as humans is to always have dreams, potentials, try perfection. It's something that I don't hear, and I think probably that's why we are so special to maybe otherworldly beings because we tend to have imagination, creativity, and we try to go after something and perfect it. That's what I hear. But then
It's
again,
the people that the leaders of the world are trying to control are not the foragers. The foragers are always going to be there. It's the leaders. It's the thought leaders. It's the people like me that cancel their YouTube channel and their Twitter channel and steal all their money out of their PayPal accounts. It's people like me that they want to control. Well, I got news for you if you're watching this right now. I am not controllable.
you're here, Marcus. I think you're about the same, right?
But he's right. We're not controllable, but we are erasable if it really comes right down to it. So just keep your visibility.
That's
That's
true. All right. Well, I think this has been a great little podcast. I love it. Brooks, I hope that you do come back. There's so much more that I want to go with and discuss, especially when it comes to um, the future of humanity, the mining, consciousness, is Earth really has Earth her own consciousness? Are we actually? And there's another thing I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, the next show probably is your theory of, well, you had the water theory that we have. Is the Earth hollow? I think you have something concerning that, and the splitting of our worlds. Is there, are we really splitting? And I think that is something that I hear people want to know more about. So I hope that you accept coming back and discussing those type of projects and topics again. Thank you so
I
much,
would love
Brooks.
to. Absolutely.
Thank you. And Marcus, thanks for coming with me along and holding my hand a little bit on a subject matter that is fairly new. And thank you for asking those salient questions. And I hope to see you too.
Not a problem. Thanks for
Thank you,
inviting me,
everybody. I
Susan.
hope you enjoy the show. See you next time.